Well, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll just keep letting folks in as they join us. But I'm Ruth Burkhall. I'm the executive director of the Board of Cooperative Ministries, who provides support to congregations and agencies in the Southern Province. And we, throughout 2020, hosted a series of what we called office hours. First, they were twice a week. Later in the year, they were once a week. And for 2021, we've gone to kind of a monthly format that is more of a really, we're trying to explore in a little more detail some of the topics and questions that came up and out of our leadership focus leadership conference, which happened in February and March of this year, and hopefully many of you were part of. But we're trying to take a little bit of a deep dive into some of the issues that came up during that time. So last month, we actually focused on both and or hybrid worship, and that was a really rich conversation with a variety of folks doing a variety of things. Today, we're here to talk a little bit about the new catechism, which debuted in 2020. You may have seen the article, I think it was the February edition of the Moravian, had an article. I'll put a link to that in the chat later. But I'm going to introduce to you Sam Gray, who I invited to sort of help lead this conversation and who has been part of the project. And he'll introduce you to some of his colleagues on the Faith and Order Commission who created, they're the interprovincial team that created this resource. And then we've also got Marie Couts, who's the Director of Christian Ed for the Eastern District in the Northern Province, as well as Beth Hayes, who's BCM's own Director of Congregational Resources and Ministries here in the Southern Province. And then Mike Reese is with us. He's the Director of the Interprovincial Board of Communication, who's responsible for sort of the distribution of this resource. And so we've got all the right players in all the right places. And so I'm going to just go right ahead and turn it over to you, Sam, and start by making sure that you tell us what is a Faith and Order Commission and what is a catechism, and then tell us what else we need to know.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sam Gray. I think I know most of you. Right now, I am pastor at New Philadelphia Moravian Church in Winston-Salem. Been serving on the Faith and Order Commission for quite a few years. It is an interprovincial entity with the Northern and Southern Province, and there are clergy members and then specifically bishops from both provinces and lay members. I guess the easiest way to say what the task or the purpose is that the provincial elders conferences will sometimes have issues that are of particular importance at maybe at a certain time in the province, and will ask the Faith and Order Commission to explore and discuss and try to come to an agreement on what a Moravian approach to some of these issues might be. In the past, we developed the Moravian approach to biblical, I have to say that again, a Moravian approach to biblical interpretation. And we made it a point to say that it would not be at all be accurate to say the, and that's kind of Moravian. And there have been a lot of issues that we have dealt with. Before I introduce everybody, I will tell you that, and I think Mike Reese would probably be able to give you a lot of good information on this, but I know that at one point there were people who were asking if the catechism was going to be reprinted, and at that point that a decision had to be made. Would that be reprinted, or would we develop a new catechism, since that one was developed back in the 50s, I believe, and some updates from time to time. As we met together and looked at how we would best express what it is that we believe as Moravians, and what are the basics of our beliefs that people joining the Moravian Church or belonging to the Moravian Church would also benefit from knowing and exploring and believing. We saw that the way the format of the previous catechism was questions and then specific answers. And since we had worked on developing the biblical interpretation document, we felt like that didn't really reflect the way we approach things as Moravians. And here's the question, and here's the right answer, but more presenting these topics. And so we got the former catechism, and basically in the table of contents took every topic that was in that catechism, but we decided to format that in under essentials, ministerials, and incidentals. Mainly essentials, because the catechism doesn't really go into detail on incidentals especially, and not as much on ministerials. And then the ones that relate to God and that relate to us. No pressure, but in a minute, Stacy Marie Wheeler has just a wonderful description of what the catechism is. So I'll probably turn it over to her in a minute, but that's a little inside joke. But I will say that here on, I'm switching the view so I can see we have Blair Couch, who is actually, has been serving as the chair of the Faith and Order, Interprovincial Faith and Order Commission for a few years, and Stacy Marie Wheeler, serving as a clergy from the Northern Province, Joyce Vance as a layperson from the Southern Province, John Wrights as a clergy from the Southern Province, and I hope my screen is showing everyone, because that's the only ones that I see present at the moment. So there you have it, Ruth.
Great. Well, go for it. If you guys want to talk a little bit about, I mean, some of the questions I have is I'm really curious as to know generally, why is it important for Moravians to understand the difference between the essentials, the ministerials, and the incidentals? And I don't know who wants to take that one, but have at it.
Well, I'll start out with one thing that I think is really important, that for a long time we have emphasized and shared and celebrated, as I believe we should, a wonderful guiding principle that is in essentials unity and non-essentials liberty, and in all things love. And I think I've been in a lot of situations over the past years where people would say, okay, we say in essentials unity, so we're all united in the essentials. By the way, what are they? What are these things we're united in? So kind of important to know. And I guess it's been quite a few years. It has to have been before the 1994 hymnal came out, because it has the different sections of God as creator, and God as redeemer, and God as sustainer. But people started looking into the writings and teachings of Luke of Prague, the fourth Moravian bishop consecrated in 1500. And he talked about not essential and non-essential, and that gets kind of confusing for some people, but essentials, ministerials, and incidentals, and that the essentials are that God creates, God redeems, God sustains, and that on the human parts we respond in faith and in love and in hope. And then ministerials are things that God has given us to lead us to the essentials. And Luke of Prague said, for example, that the Bible, Scripture, is that first, foremost, and most important means of coming to know Jesus and coming to know God, which is the essential. And that, in my mind, at least, is different from saying, he wasn't saying, okay, here's what's essential, this is not essential. This is essential to salvation, and this is how we get there. And so things like the Scripture and church, and hate to say it, Blair and Graham, but bishops, all of those things are not in that category, but they help us get to the things that are essential. And so that's why we thought that approaching it that way, and again, as far as I can tell, we did not leave out any of the topics that were in the former catechism. It was just formatted in a different way and presented in a different way. Blair.
Well, I'd like to back up just a bit. Thank you, Sam, for the wonderful overview. Just to say that 2 former members of the Faith and Order Commission are on, and that's Kay Windsor and Joe Nicholas.
Yes.
Tell us a little more. What do you want us to know about this resource? Does anybody want to take us on a tour? Blair.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important to know, and it's something that we struggled with throughout the 5 years of trying to write this document by committee, and really wonderful insights. I do have to mention Daryl Bell, who was just a wonderful, wonderful, calming, comic presence in our midst, and we really missed him as we wrapped this up. I think Beth and Marie will appreciate that this catechism is not a curriculum, and so this is that if I were using just this booklet, this catechism, I probably would add some practical elements to help people kind of get to it. But this is not the curriculum. And so Beth and Marie have been in discussion with the Faith and Order Commission too, as well, over the years, to say, how could we supplement the catechism with curriculum that might be a companion? So it's a teaching tool, but it's not a curriculum.
Yes, and one I've had the joy, actually this started before it was really published or even in its final form, but as I started here at New Philadelphia, I realized that I needed to start a confirmation class, and actually we're having the confirmation this Sunday, and used since I had the drafts, used that as the guide for the classes, but we also used Simply Moravian, and to learn a little bit more about our history and from a different angle, and then also some videos from a website called the Bible Project that would get into some of the biblical themes, and especially since up until this past Sunday, this was all on Zoom, and last Sunday afternoon we had our first in-person meeting out in the pavilion, and so those were really helpful. But like exactly what you're saying, you use that as the content and then figure out what's the best way to present this and teach it.
Ruth, I can take a moment and just talk through the development of the actual booklet that we have here, some of the thinking behind it, how we're distributing it, how you can get your hands on it, and how we expect it to be used. So as Sam mentioned at the very top of this, part of what triggered this was that we were out of the old catechisms. We were going to have to reprint. And did we really want to, or did we want to look at updating this as a document for use in the church? And so it was a joy to work with Faith and Order over the years. Lots of back and forth. It was a really amazing to watch them work. There were several meetings that they had right here in the church center here, and they would spend hours going over just to make sure that everything was right where it needed to be. So by the time we finally got the copy ready to go, my thought behind building this was it was a couple ways. One, we would make it nice. If you've seen the printed physical copy of this, it feels good. It's got a nice cover. It's very simple. It's very easy to read. It's also designed that at your congregation, if you want to print them out, we have it available as a download online, that it prints out. If you print it in two-sided, it will print into a booklet just like this. So you can make it exactly like we've got it here, or use it as a PDF. As you go through the book itself, you'll find there are a number of places where there's a little bullet in bolded text. What Faith and Order did was build a great glossary in the back, a lot of different terms that your confirmands or you as a reader, definitions from sort of a Moravian point of view. I found that to be very, very useful. There's also great bibliography in the back, so you can see where all of this information came from. A lot of great resources here available both from, from the BCM, but also from the IBOC, and things that are online and things that are there. You'll also find all the way through that there are connections to our Moravian Book of Worship throughout that are highlighted as we go through, so that you can see, you can make those direct connections to the Book of Worship as you're working through this. So again, the idea behind this was to make it a simple piece that folks can be able to print where they are or use as is. Again, we do have these available from the IBOC, but I also encourage you to hop online. There's where we have it under Catechism, and read the article that introduces it, and also there are links to it at the very bottom of it. So, but again, it was a true joy to work with Faith and Order on building this. A lot of back and forth, but I'm glad that it's out and available for churches to use.
Thanks, Mike. That's very helpful.
Ruth, I might chime in if it's okay, unless somebody else wants to say something. I'm going to speak to it from an educational standpoint, because we get questions when people come into the Resource Center or about, we want to teach confirmation, but we aren't real sure exactly where to go other than the Catechism. What do you have? I mean, where can we go? I can tell you that there's a website called buildfaith.org that has a current list of what all the denominations have published on confirmation in the last 5 years. Most of them worked with the Confirmation Project, which was a collaborative consortium. I don't know why the Moravians were not a part of that, but these people all have developed curriculum. All of it is, I have most of it here. All of it is extremely, extremely valuable stuff. And all I can say is it's great to have the Moravian and the Moravian Catechism and the Moravian input. But if you hand this to someone who is not an educator or even not a lot of the pastors have training in the seminaries on how to go about developing this. I think you're going to need help to engage the kids. I do know that Raleigh has used a piece that the Presbyterian, the best one that I've seen is the one that the Presbyterians put out called God's Big Questions. And Raleigh has paired and used this along with the the questions from the Catechism, and they took the questions that kids are asked at confirmation and delved into them. It's an excellent resource, and we have permission to supplement the Moravian stuff. In other words, we can take this and go through it and say, okay, here's a great lesson. Here's how you put the Moravian spin on it using the Catechism, the Book of Worship, Simply Moravian, those kinds of things. It's going to take time. It's going to take somebody's diligent effort, but I think it's going to be critical, because you cannot just hand a piece of paper to kids and you need a plan for how you're going to teach that. And it needs to be an engaging plan. I can speak also that Unity has done something really unique in the last 2 months. They joined a couple churches together who had maybe 1 or 2 kids. And it's hard to teach 1 or 2 kids in a setting, but they had a big joint class where they used some of the key questions out of the Catechism and had the kids dialoguing around them, and then kind of supplemented it from there. And I think that's a great model, because not all your churches have a core group of kids that want to join the church all at one time. And it's hard to teach 1 person or 2 people to do that. But if they're in a group, you get a lot more success. And then Unity spend it off so that they were able to do some individual stuff and they will be confirmed, I think, the neatest way possible, in that they are going to be the liturgists at the 2021 Children's Festival and Love Feast as the closing act of their confirmation class. And I think that's a really cool thing to be able to say, yes, we're going to be Moravians and we're going to celebrate with St. Philip's at this festival, but we're newly confirmed Moravians, and this is how we can be a part of it. So I cannot say enough about the fact that someone needs to take this and create the curriculum that goes around it, because you cannot take the catechism and teach it the way that it's printed unless you have some pretty good skills.
Yeah. And I'm sure that Beth would be happy to talk with folks who are wrestling with it. Yeah, and get
Well,
yep.
Although I have no answers, and I'm not the person probably to be doing this, because I won't be here long enough to see a finished product of that happen. But I am saying that someone needs to take that on, because otherwise you're doing your denomination a great disservice. And I really would advise going to that buildfaith.org and see that list of suggestions of what the different denominations have done. Very impressive.
Thanks, Beth. I did put the Build Faith in the chat, as well as the contact information for Dana, if folks want to follow up on the Unity Project to get a little more information about how she's doing that. And I am curious as to some of you, I know that pastors for many years have been really having to be pretty creative about confirmation. And Marie, I'd love for you to weigh in nuggets of wisdom that you might have regarding just confirmation in general, but I also want to hear from pastors and those kind of in the field doing the work in terms of what seems to have been working for you all.
Well, I'd love to say a little something about, unless Marie wants to speak first, I'm fine with that if you want to piggyback on Beth at all. Okay. As a confirmand that was taught from the old catechism, straight out of it, with no curriculum and not much engaging, other than the natural charisma of my pastor, who was a great guy, but very old school. And as a congregational pastor who's done with an education background, that's done a lot of trying to figure out how to use other people's curriculums or curriculums that have come from different eras in the Moravian Church that all have good pieces, but try to patchwork together for small congregation classes. And then as somebody on the Faith and Order Commission, it was important to me for us to have something that wasn't going to be mistaken for a curriculum, but was going to offer a lot of good Moravian resources, foundational resource pieces to pastors until we get that curriculum of our own, right? That or until we format something. So a big piece of discussion for the Faith and Order Commission was, do we make this look like a classic catechism, which has never been a Moravian thing, right? I mean, we took other people's catechisms and then we formatted ours like it with our own answers, tweaked other people's answers, or are we going to make this a Moravian looking catechism? And part of what Sam was alluding to that I think is important is that we really felt strongly that the Moravian part of our tradition is a spectrum of theological perspectives on these essentials and non-essentials that we need to honor and respect. And so that wasn't going to be served faithfully by the Q&A format that we had previously. And we felt like if this was going to be used for not only adolescents in confirmation, but also adults that might be new members or also going through confirmation, or coming in for baptism into our tradition from a different tradition, we wanted to make certain they had a feel and a faithful sense of where our perspective was coming from. and what was sort of what were the foundational pieces of the Moravian Church. And that was going to take some nuances. And so we felt like the expanded outline, which was really thanks to the bishops in our midst that offered us that as sort of the scaffolding. We felt like that was going to be more faithful in terms of looking at those questions more broadly and usefully, and then bringing people back to the foundational resources that they came from of our tradition.
Thank you, Stacy. That's helpful. Anybody else want to weigh in a little bit? Talk about any best practices, what's worked for you, what your challenges might be, what questions you might have?
This is Joyce. I would like to say that don't limit it, this use for confirmation. We are about to wrap up a 4-week study on the Ministerials. And I have maybe 8 adults that have been participating. And it's not that they didn't know what we were talking about, but it's the kind of thing that people, they like to delve a little deeper, and we ask each other hard questions and the challenges, and it's been very enriching. We're on for about an hour and a half, and we're lucky to go off on time, so to leave, because it's very engaging. So all along we said this is not a curriculum, but it is a good springboard for adult discussion that have the background, and they want to look at us, okay, how are our faith statements written?
So. Marie, do you want to go? You've been looking to talk. You want to go first?
Well, let me just real quickly say I do have some things that I want to mention, excuse me, but before that, I'm really interested in, you go ahead, Carol, but also I'm interested in knowing what are the pastors who are on this call using for confirmation, as well as how you feel about this fitting into your process or your program. But then I'll add some comments after that.
Okay, I think this is a superb instrument. Thank you all who put time and effort into it. I think it's great. I do have one funny story for Blair, and Margaret was on here too, I thought. Years ago, when I first started teaching confirmation with your dad, and we used that green book with the questions and answers. One week, for some reason, he wasn't there. So I proceeded with the class, and we went through a particular section, and we answered the questions, and they wrote their answers in the book, like they're supposed to. So the next week, your dad comes and looks at it and says, oh, no, they have to write the right answers. So they had to erase all those answers to get to the answers that he wanted to be put in there. I'll never forget that. That was very funny. And I have used over the years many, and I've pretty much written my own curriculum. As I'm looking through this, it is very weighty. There is so much information in there. You could not possibly use this as a confirmation text. It just is too much. And I would fear that most people would just end up reading it to the kids and boring. But I'm also thinking that perhaps, and I'd be willing to help with this, if we picked out pieces that we could start with younger kids. In other words, the book of worship, you just don't hit that when you're in 9th grade or 6th grade or whatever it is. But, for the younger kids, the elementary kids, to pick from the area section. I'm just picking one section, the Book of Worship. You could begin that if you made a plan, if you wrote out a plan for how you're going to make sure that all these essential elements, and I'm not using the word in the Moravian way, but all of these essential elements get put into a pattern that if a child went from, say, first grade or maybe even kindergarten through confirmation, whatever age, they would have gotten all of these essential elements. In other words, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a full curriculum where you give how to do this and associated crafts and all that kind of stuff, but an outline of how you could insert these basic ideas from early on so that you would build on those ideas till they got to confirmation. They would be familiar with parts of the Book of Worship. They would already, and you would have a foundation to build on. And then the third step might be to add to the curriculum those fun things to do, those interesting concepts, other things that you wanted to insert there to make it really, really fun and interesting.
I can chime in just in terms of the resources that I've used. And Carol, I think your dog wants to go out. But the resources that I've used been all over the map. Utilized a little bit of K. Ward's Potter's Wheel. Is it Faithful Step by Bill Gramley? For quite a few years, I've utilized Matt Knapp had put together some confirmation stuff that he had written up, and I used that. Diane Joseph, when she served at Emmaus, I was her student pastor. She had a bunch of resources that I used. So it was, all over the map. And there was one year, this was when I was at West Salem, I was on a memorization kick, and these poor children for that 1 year, it was like, we are going to do the Moravian Catechism. And it was like drill sergeant, I'm sure they hated it, but I have found it interesting that we don't have this sort of Moravian confirmation curriculum, this sort of universal, like, this is what we do. And yet at the same time, the fact that we don't is, that's a very Moravian type of thing. And with this unique issue of confirmation, of spiritual formation for young ones, it dabbles in essentials, ministerials, and incidentals. There's elements of this that are essential. There are elements of it that are incidental, that it makes sense that, Stacy does something that different than what Marie does and what Ruth does and what Carol does. So I don't know if I'm saying anything, but that's been my experience.
I just echo, Marie, that I've used all of those resources that Jason just mentioned, as well as Presbyterian curriculums and UCC curriculums to supplement.
Well, let me jump in here and give you a little bit of some information as well as some background to this. This is not recent, but I'm not sure that it would be any different today. Many years ago, and I can't date it except to say that Gary Strawn was the president of the Eastern District at the time. So that kind of gives you a time frame. But people were asking for confirmation curriculum. And so I was asked by the district board, I'm going to try and make this very quick because there's more I want to say. I was asked to call all the pastors and find out what they were using. And here's my takeaway from that. Pastors who had been in the pastorate at that point in time, pastors who had been in the pastorate for more than 2 years, their answer was, I don't want a new confirmation curriculum because I've developed my own. This is what I am using and I'm comfortable with it. I can open the book and go for it. Those who were just out of seminary, however, were wondering, what do I use and what is available for us? So we so that's my second question at the time was, what do you use to teach any Moravian particular pieces? And many of them said they didn't, that one of their struggles was they have many confirmands who have never attended Sunday school. And so what they wrestle with is, in confirmation, am I supposed to teach them about being a Christian or give them Moravian information? And so they wrestled with that piece. Out of that, then, jumping ahead to some years then, was we asked if they would use something that was developed specifically that dealt with the Moravian history pieces that could be used as a supplement to whatever they were using in their confirmation curriculum. Fast forward to now, 3 of us got together and we wrote a Moravian supplement that covers all of our Moravian. The title of it is Take the Ancestors With You. So it covers everything from Huss to the women to missions to customs and practices. It covers the gamut. Within that, in the lesson on Luke, we have PowerPoints that go with all of the lessons. And there is a PowerPoint that addresses the essentials, the ministerials, and the incidentals that I think might be helpful if you're using that section in this, then to supplement with that. So that Moravian piece is available free, download, you can contact me for that. I would echo what Beth said about the big God, big questions. I have looked at that, and I have over the years, I've been at this many years, and I have looked at many different confirmation curricula, and this one is incredibly well done. And I would love to see us take that and take the pieces that are strictly Presbyterian and with their permission, supplement the Moravian piece to go with that, because I could see that fitting with our the new catechism pretty well. That's my second thought. So you really should check out that, particularly the infographics that go with the big God, big question. My third comment is, when Mike was telling about this, the catechism, and by the way, I have to tell you that I have had many contacts from pastors asking, are they going to reprint the old catechism as well? And the reason isn't so much the content. I believe that it isn't because the content was so deeply loved as it was, that's what they're used to using. That's what they're used to teaching. Therefore, I think we're going to need to promote this in a way to help the use of it, just as we have done. I think this is a wonderful forum and format for that. But when Mike, I believe it was Mike, shared that the table of contents of the old catechism was taken as the basis, and it might have been Blair who shared that for this, that was very helpful for me. I didn't pick that up, and I thought that is a piece that needs to be shared. That we need to do that in the promo, because that will help those who have a passion for the old catechism to see that we've taken that and have placed it in a new format, but you haven't lost any of that content. So for whatever that's worth, I think that really needs to have a wider audience to hear that. Potter's wheel, graceful step, all of the things that Jason and Stacy mentioned, that's what I'm hearing over and over. I am also hearing a lot of churches, and that might be a little bit strong, but many churches that where the pastor isn't teaching confirmation, where it's being given to someone else to teach. And I think we need to keep that in mind, because that changes how we present whatever curriculum or material that we're going to encourage the use of, so that non-clergy can pick that up and be able to use that as well. I'll stop there if you have questions.
I'd just like to, Marie, thanks, because yeah, I know you've been at this a long time, and I know I've been in at least 2 synods where committees were howling for some kind of new catechism for the kids. The one thing, Mark Breland teaches confirmation, handles that here at Lidditz, and I know that his biggest issue is developing relationships. He's less concerned with getting in all of the particulars than he is in developing relationships, so that the youth see church as a place for them to be and to have a part of. And so the one thing I would also encourage people to do is to look through this. And I've only briefly looked through it, but I know there are lots of places where you could give the pastor or whoever's teaching it could give personal testimony as to what, how that touched their lives. And I think that would be a great thing to encourage as well.
One thing that I've appreciated, besides all of the, all the details of the content, and I will say content-wise, the thing that the kids in my group responded to the most was some of the lists, like images of God and images of the Holy Spirit. Some of those just very concrete things that when I would assign sections, that was normally what they would mention or what they remembered. But I think beyond that, just getting a generation focusing on the idea of things that are essential and then things that are ministerial and incidental. I see that as, if it's taken seriously, having a significant impact down the road in terms of how and how not congregations become divided. And because they've even made the observation that some of the disagreements, not some, but pretty much all of the disagreements that they see around them have very little or nothing to do with what we say is essential. And so they'll say, oh, you mean it doesn't matter, which kind of music you like, or it doesn't matter how church does this, or it doesn't matter this. And I said, well, it's not essential, no. And they spent probably a half an hour trying to decide what is essential in a pizza, and they couldn't even agree on the cheese or any kind of cheese. So it was basically a crust and a topping, and everything else is ministerial or incidental. But just, I think, having that mindset of this is what really matters, and these other things may matter to you, and it's not like they're not important, but this is what matters as far as our relationship with God and with each other.
Thanks, Sam. And I would also add, this is just very anecdotal. My son did confirmation late. He was probably 15 or 16 because there weren't many kids at Unity at that time. And so he did it with a couple of younger girls. Stuart Zimmerman was our pastor then. And what I really liked about the process there was, at that point, Jake had lots of questions about faith, more questions than answers, right? And he really needed space to have doubt and to express doubt and to have just sort of, safe conversations with a grown-up that wasn't his mother or father. And so even just that whole act of, I think, creating that safe space is super important and worth a lot of time and energy. And then I will add, I put in the chat earlier that Simply Moravian, which is a resource that's probably about 5 or 6 years old now, but is a sort of it's written on about the 5th or 6th grade level, a little bit of a modern take on the ancient Unity and their story, starting with Huss, and then kind of taking you through a very brief and cursory description of the essentials, ministerials, and incidentals. But it does contain, especially the second edition. The second edition contains a beautiful liturgy about the essentials, as well as a hymn about the essentials. There are some lovely devotionals written by Andrew Heil and his wife, Sarah Hubbard, that are lovely on each of the essentials. And there are activities for children around the essentials written by educators from primarily the Southern Province, but a diverse group of educators, as well as some conversation starters for adults and youth. So I do commend that to you as a good supplement for confirmation resources as well. And you can get it from Mike at the IBOC online. And if you're Southern Province, we have them in our office as well. So it's a little spiral bound book.
So I just want to offer something that is, this was part of my perspective when we were doing this. And as a congregational pastor who's had to teach confirmation to lots of little groups, or try to pull groups together and teach with other pastors. Part of my hope with this was, and this may be a little bit offensive to my colleagues, and so I kind of apologize for this, but kind of a kind of a comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable perspective on teaching confirmation, right? Because I was that confirmand that, the catechism was used as the curriculum, and it was not effective. And it was not engaging. Like I said, I had a great relationship in a small church with a good pastor who developed really good relationships, even though he was a retired guy who came and still cared about the kids of that congregation and really invested time in relating to us. And that was the, hands down, the most effective tool and effective part of confirmation for me as a child in a Moravian church. But the classes were, I don't remember a thing about it, except that I said once that the Blue Ridge Mountains were in Virginia, and he was like, what are you talking about? Do you not know anything? Right. So he was asking me where. We also had to memorize where Moravian churches were. Right. I don't know why. So anyway, one of the things that was important to me was that we don't get lazy as congregational pastors with confirmation. I also happened to write a big paper on it on confirmation as a rite without a theology when I was in seminary, because it's kind of that in-between thing. Confirmation. We know a lot about baptism. We do a lot with the sacrament of communion. We talk a lot about what we should be offering new members, but confirmation is kind of in between, right? It's not a sacrament, it's a rite. And yet oftentimes it's just one of those things to get through for pastors, unless you love teaching, unless you love being with the kids and trying to engage them. So I didn't want, bye Jason, I didn't want my colleagues to be able to do that, just hand the Q&A book to people, because those Q&A answers, if you look at them, they don't help us grow in our faith. They give us creedal and doctrinal things, but as an adolescent, I don't really believe they help us grow in our faith unless we have somebody willing to help unpack that and put those in context. So that was a little bit of why I felt it was important on the commission. And we had a lot of good, there's a lot of good give and take over a very long time on this. So it felt representative and it felt good. But I have to say that I was hoping to push some of our colleagues to do more of that searching that Marie and Beth were talking about, to looking at curriculum resources that would mesh well, and also to think about this as in the way that Joyce was talking about, as an adult resource for education as well.
I really appreciate what Stacy just said very much. Agree with all of that. And I would just say, in addition to echoing that, is to say, let's not be very careful to not lower the bar. I understand that we want the kids to come and we want them to enjoy it and we want it to be engaging, but we also want it to be a learning time, and we can't lower the bar. I have seen some confirmation classes that the kids absolutely love because it is nothing but fun and called confirmation. But my fear is, at the end of the day, they aren't taking anything with them. They will have the relationship piece, which is important, and I'm not downgrading that. But I will tell you that I am one who had a wonderful confirmation class, and I am serving in the church today because that was the first step of my feeling called to ministry. And so let's keep that bar high in terms of making it exciting, engaging. Jesus was a wonderful teacher to engage people, and let us not move away from that. But at the same time, please let us keep the content there and keep that bar high, because you never know what down the years that impact is going to make on those young people.
Marie, are you going to be doing the confirmation retreats at Camp Hope in the future?
That is our hope. As a matter of fact, obviously the pandemic has caused us to cancel them, and even this year. But I will say that when the Catechism came out, that was my first step in looking at that in terms of how do we take that and make that be a part of our confirmation retreat. So I think that's where you were going with your question. So yes.
Well, where I was going with is that's an excellent, it's a 2-year series, correct?
Correct. 1 year history and the next year mission.
Yeah. And I really would encourage all, Eastern District, especially churches, confirmation groups to, you get the combination there. You get your relationship with the camp experience, and you also get the information. It's a great thing.
Marie, for the sake of our Southern Province friends, can you tell us a little bit about what that is when you say confirmation retreat?
Yes, we do a 2-year alternating program at Camp Hope, and the first year is on history. And so we go from the husk to Herrenhout on that one, and they meet the characters along the way. We have trifolds that we made, they travel. That the second year is mission, and we actually make a map of the world on the grounds, and we have the trifolds taking them to each mission station in the Moravian Church. And we have added the new ones because we think it's important that our young people realize the church is still growing. The church is still about mission. So while we have the historical start of mission, let me just tell you, every time I have to make a new trifold, I think, give me a break. But so anyway, the second year is on mission, but then also we have them engaged in developing their own mission statement. What is their mission in ministry? So yeah, I'd be happy to share how we do it. And we could even share the patterns for the trifolds that we use, and could send pictures for anyone who's interested.
Great. And do they come as part of their church with adults from their church, or do they come individually?
They come as confirmation classes, and we encourage the pastors, obviously, or at least the person who's leading their confirmation, to come with them. And while we do things that build community, the truth is this is part of their confirmation class. And pastors have liked it because this is where they're getting the Moravian history and mission piece. So then the pastors take that out of their particular curriculum because they know they're going to get it at the retreat. So when they travel the world or travel the history route, they go as a confirmation class so that they can discuss that when they get back home together.
Great. That sounds wonderful. What else is, I'm aware of our time. We've got about 5 minutes. What else do you just need to know before we complete this conversation about the catechism? What else do you want to offer? Well, then
can I just say we had confirmation this past Sunday, and we're not having it this Sunday because this Sunday is Dean Jurgen's last Sunday with us, and he's retiring, and so we're having Pentecost communion, and we're also having a celebration of his ministry. So the confirmand that we confirmed last week is just one of the best kids ever, and we had 2. I'm not sure what happened to the other one, but anyway, I'm looking forward to having her participate in church because I know she will, and it's going to be a nice Sunday.
Well, I would just like to remark that it's interesting to hear about your 2-year programs, the rotating retreats and whatnot. When I was a student pastor at Reading Moravian, I co-taught the 2-year confirmation class. And in the congregations that I've served in the Southern Province, they want to do 6 or 7 weeks and have the ceremony. I'm going to call it a photo op, and get them engaged in Holy Communion. And so I went for some guidance on that, and there is really not a lot of consistency across our congregations, at least in the Southern Province, about the length and the content of confirmation class. And it's a challenge as a pastor. I mean, I appreciate what Stacy had to say, set the bar high and work for some thorough teaching and learning. And it's not just the kids that are resistant to that, it's their parents as well. And I was in a conversation recently on a Facebook group for Moravian clergy that, a lot of our theology is kind of lost on our congregations. And in part it's because our teaching is not thorough on that topic. And of course, confirmation class would seem to be a principal place by which we would accomplish that. But I doubt that there's going to be any standardization of that anytime soon.
I just had an idea. Why not have a reconfirmation class for adults and incorporate learning from this new catechism through adult Bible studies, or however you wanted to do that, and give adults in our churches the opportunity to reconfirm. We do that anyway in our liturgy, for confirmation or whatever, and make it real, do it.
Well, in listening to this, I've been suggesting to myself to use the curriculum as a preaching resource. Pentecost is coming up. I'll read the section on the Holy Spirit. How can I pull that into my sermon? And probably at least one Sunday of the month, there'll be something that probably every Sunday, the catechism would have something to speak to what the scripture would say.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. I'm hoping that the Right Reverend Sam Gray will pray us on out of here, out of our Zoom room and into the world. But I do thank you for spending this hour with us. And I'm not exactly, I think next month we're going to be talking about tools for collaboration and interaction online. And that's kind of taking it the next level past Zoom and Google Docs. So you might want to join us for that. Sam, will you pray us out of here?
Sure.
Thank you.
Dear God, we thank you for revealing yourself to us in so many ways. And we thank you that we can learn more and more about you every day and all throughout our lives. We are humbled and amazed that you call on us and as your children to share what we know with others and to help to guide them as they not only learn about you but learn to know you. We thank you for that privilege of learning together and exploring more and more ways to be able to share these things in the most effective ways. Thank you for so many people who dedicate their talents and their lives to doing that. And we pray that you will bless us as we seek to continue to confirm all that we know of you and to share that with others. In Jesus' name, amen.